On the 30th of October 1942, a Liberator bomber of the Royal Air Force crashed at Plasterdown on Dartmoor, just east of Tavistock. 6 of the 7-man crew were killed in the crash. Now, nearly 75 years later, relatives and associates of the crew have come to Dartmoor for the unveiling and dedication of a memorial to the 7 airmen. And so, as it approaches 11 o'clock on the fine spring morning of Saturday, 8th of April 2017, over 100 people gather at Plasterdown to pay their respects to the men whose aircraft crashed there in 1942. Led by the standard of the Royal British Legion, Reverend Tony Vigors and Father Louis Rounier take their place by the memorial stone draped in the Union flag. Reverend Vigors and Father Louis will conduct the service to dedicate the new memorial. Tony Vigors is no stranger to these events. His father was a Royal Air Force flight engineer who served with the Canadian Air Force Squadron during the war. He was shot down over France in 1944 and spent the last year of the war as a prisoner. Father Louis is the parish priest of the Holy Cross Catholic Church at nearby Yelverton. Reverend Vigors introduces the service to commemorate the crew of the Liberator that crashed in 1942. They were Flying Officer Gavin Sellar, the first pilot and captain, and he is represented today by Christopher Wheeler, a former master at Charterhouse, Gavin's old school. Flying Officer Victor Crowther, the navigator, was a member of the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and he is represented by Wing Commander Lisa d'Oliveira, who is Air Advisor of the Royal New Zealand Air Force in London. Pilot Officer William Cruikshanks, one of the radio operators, is represented by his niece Kay Hardy. Pilot Officer William Martin, the other radio operator, is represented by his nephews Bill Martin and David McFarlane. Sergeant Harry Daw was the co-pilot, and he is represented by his niece Margaret Rees-Jones. Sergeant William Fraser was the flight engineer. He came from Newton Mearns in Renfrewshire. Sergeant Dennis Pass, the rear gunner, was the sole survivor, although he was seriously injured. He is represented by his widow Irene, his daughter Janet Rogers, and his grandson Tim Rogers. Following the saying of the Lord's Prayer, Wing Commander Derek Straw will relate the story of the last flight of the Liberator. Wing Commander Straw was a navigator with 224 Squadron in the 1960s that flew Avro Shackleton's based at Gibraltar. In 1982, he commanded the RAF Force of Nimrod reconnaissance aircraft based at Ascension Island during the retaking of the Falkland Islands. Now he explains how, on the 30th of October 1942, a Royal Air Force Liberator bomber, serial number FK242, and with a radio call sign K King of 224 Squadron Coastal Command, took off from RAF Beaulieu in Hampshire to carry out a patrol over the Bay of Biscay. The purpose of the mission that day was to escort ships carrying troops to North Africa. The presence of aircraft like the Liberator was an effective deterrent against marauding U-boats and enemy reconnaissance aircraft, and they helped save many lives. Having been airborne for more than 10 hours, the Liberator was returning to Beaulieu when it struck a barrage balloon cable as it was passing Plymouth. Damaged and low on fuel, the aircraft was diverted to make an emergency landing at RAF Harrowere, 2 miles from where we are now. It was dark and hampered by low cloud and a short unlit runway. The crew struggled to bring the aircraft down safely. On the third attempt, it ran out of fuel and came down just 200 yards from here. The crash was horrendous and 6 of the 7-man crew were killed. Miraculously, the 7th man survived, but he was seriously injured. 40 years after the crash, the sole survivor, Dennis Pass, returned to Devon with his wife Irene to pay tribute and place a personal memorial to his fallen comrades. 224 Squadron Royal Air Force had been formed in Italy in 1918. Their motto in Italian is Fedele all'amico, which translated means faithful to a friend. Dennis Pass was certainly faithful to his friends, and we are gathered here today to continue that tradition. The service continues with the lesson, which is taken from St. John chapter 15, verses 12 to 17. It is read by Father Runier. This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends, and if ye do whatsoever I command you. Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you. Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and ordained you, that ye should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatsoever ye shall ask of the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, that ye love one another. The lesson is followed by the address, which is delivered by Reverend Vigars, and will be followed by prayers offered by Father Runier. There will then be the act of dedication of the new memorial before it is unveiled by Mrs. Irene Pass. In 1983, Irene Pass had accompanied her husband Dennis when he placed the original memorial plaque where the Liberator crashed in 1942. Also there that day were Harry and Irene Palmer from the nearby farm, who, along with Henry Walsh, a young evacuee from Plymouth who was staying with them, had helped to get Dennis Pass from the wreckage of the bomber. Relatives of the Palmers and Henry Walsh are here today, no doubt remembering the effect the crash must have had on them. Now Robert Jones, who arranged the placement of the memorial, steps forward to help with the mechanics of the unveiling. Irene Pass, now age 94, is assisted by her grandson Tim Rogers and accompanied by two of her great-grandchildren. As she removes the Union flag to reveal the memorial plaque set into a post of Dartmoor granite, Irene Pass pays her own personal tribute to the crew of Liberator K. King as Reverend Vigars reads the name of the 7 airmen. Flying Officer Gavin Sellar, Royal Air Force. Flying Officer Victor Crowther, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Pilot Officer William Cruikshanks, Royal Air Force. Pilot Officer William Martin, Royal Air Force. Sergeant Harry Daw, Royal Air Force. Sergeant William Fraser, Royal Air Force. Sergeant Dennis Pass, Royal Air Force. This is followed by the laying of wreaths. The first will be laid by Wing Commander Lisa d'Oliveira on behalf of the New Zealand Air Force. Before taking up her post in London, Wing Commander d'Oliveira was a navigator on Lockheed P-6 maritime patrol aircraft and C-130 Hercules. The next wreath with the crest of 224 Squadron Royal Air Force is laid by Wing Commander Derek Straw, who was also a former navigator who served in that squadron. Then comes a wreath from the Tavistock branch of the Royal British Legion, to be followed by family wreaths laid by Kay Hardy, niece of Alan Cruikshanks, and by Janet Rogers, daughter of Dennis Pass. The exhortation is delivered by Reverend Vigers, and they are the familiar lines from For the Fallen by Lawrence Binion. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them. As we bear those words in mind, the heath of Plasterdown echoes to the strains of the last post, and this will be followed by a minute's silence. The epitaph is the poem This Bit of England by Edward Vine Hall. It will be read by Kay Hardy, niece of Pilot Officer Alan Cruikshanks. It was the final entry in the airman's personal journal that was completed by his friends after the young man's death.
If this bit of England be worthier because of me, stronger for the strength I bring, sweeter for the songs I sing, purer for the path I tread, lighter for the light I shed, richer for the gifts I give, happier because I live, nobler for the death I die, not in vain have I been I.
And of course these words are all the more poignant, bearing in mind that of the 6 men who died that night, the eldest was 27 and the youngest just 21. The service of dedication is about to conclude with the act of commitment, which will be delivered by Reverend Tony Vigers, and it will end with a blessing from Father Louis Renier. After the service, some of the relatives will travel to the parish cemetery at nearby Buckland Monacorum to lay wreaths on the graves of the 3 crew of the Liberator who are buried there. They are Flying Officer Victor Crowther, Pilot Officer Bill Martin and Sergeant William Fraser.